Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving into the absolutely incredible rags to riches story of Andrew Carnegie. Now, we aren't just going to look at the immense wealth he accumulated. We're going to completely decode the exact business strategies he used to transform the American economy.
So, let's set the scene. Andrew Carnegie didn't start out with some massive steel mill. He literally began with almost nothing. Picture this, a penniless child immigrant crossing the Atlantic Ocean, fleeing the total destruction of Scotland's traditional hand-loom weaving industry. Machines were already changing the economy, and his family had been financially devastated by it.
But flash forward a few decades, and the contrast is just staggering. By 1901, the empire he built from scratch would be sold to become the very first billion-dollar corporation in American history. I mean, how on earth does one person make that kind of unprecedented leap?
While looking at his timeline, the turning point actually came pretty early. He went from a struggling cotton factory worker to a young telegraph messenger in Pennsylvania, and he quickly realized something crucial. Information could move way faster than physical goods. He took those insights, built powerful business connections, and during the massive industrial expansion of the Civil War, he started pouring his earnings heavily into iron.
He was paying extremely close attention to the booming railroad industry. He figured out quite early that railroads weren't just simple transportation companies moving people from point A to point B. They were massive consumers of infrastructure. They demanded bridges, locomotives, rails, telegraph lines, and, most importantly, endless amounts of steel.
Section 2. Mastering the Steel System. Carnegie went absolutely all in on something called the Bessemer process. This was a 19th century manufacturing breakthrough that used blasts of air to literally burn the impurities out of molten iron. What did that mean? It meant you could produce large quantities of steel incredibly cheaply. He looked at this and knew, for sure, that if America was going to build upward and outward, steel was the material of the future.
To guarantee his dominance, he relied on one absolutely crucial strategy: vertical integration. He realized that depending on outside suppliers meant they could just squeeze his margins whenever they wanted. So he decided he had to own the entire production chain to fiercely control his costs.
His system basically worked as a self-feeding loop. First, acquire the coal and iron ore. Next, control the rail lines to move those raw materials. Then, manufacture the steel in your own factories. It was all about driving production costs down to their absolute minimums.
And as he constantly reinvested in better furnace technology, his production costs plummeted. At the exact same time, demand from rapidly expanding American cities was surging. Older wooden structures were being replaced, bridges, skyscrapers were reaching upward, and Carnegie's company sat perfectly at the center of the whole shebang.
Now let's look at the next part of our story: the price of efficiency.
To understand the full picture of this era, we have to look objectively at the human cost of this relentless push. Because while profits were reaching historic highs, the workers faced some truly brutal realities. They operated heavy machinery around enormous furnaces, enduring extreme heat, toxic conditions, and physically exhausting hours just to keep those production costs down. All this simmering tension eventually boiled over in the infamous 1892 Homestead Strike. Carnegie's manager, Henry Clay Frick, refused to negotiate with a powerful labor union, and Pinkerton Guards were brought in. On July 6th, horrific, deadly violence erupted between the striking workers and the Guards, which ultimately ended with the state militia stepping in to break the union. Now, Carnegie was actually over in Scotland during the strike, but his reputation suffered immense damage. Critics argued he had created a system where profits mattered more than people. And given that Carnegie had written extensively about the moral responsibility of the wealthy, well, the contradiction between his public persona and the reality of his factories was becoming impossible to ignore.
Which brings us to the billion-dollar exit.
Despite the intense labor conflicts, his steel empire continued its rapid global expansion. But Carnegie understood that the scale required to dominate the market was becoming almost unfathomable. So, when financier J.P. Morgan recognized the industry was ready for consolidation in 1901, Carnegie sold his entire machine. He secured enormous personal wealth and simply walked away from business entirely. Then came his final, and honestly, staggering transformation. This ruthless industrial titan decided to dedicate the rest of his life to giving his vast fortune away. He truly believed the wealthy had a duty to society. So, he systematically funded thousands of libraries worldwide, supported major universities, backed scientific research, and financed global peace organizations.
When we evaluate him today, we really must hold these two stark realities side by side. On one hand, you have the master builder who perfectly understood scale, technology, and supply chains to utterly transform an economy. On the other hand, he stands as a symbol of inequality, building immense wealth while his workers faced incredibly harsh conditions and had very little economic security. It really highlights the complex duality of industrial capitalism itself.
So, what should you absolutely take away from this explainer? It's that Carnegie's influence didn't just stop in the 19th century. His playbook, controlling supply chains, automating production, investing heavily in tech, building at massive scale, and relentlessly searching for lower costs, that is the exact same blueprint used by today's largest global manufacturers. The physical products might have changed, but the foundational strategy is pure Carnegie.
I think Carnegie's greatest business lesson is this: the biggest fortunes are often created before the future becomes obvious. He didn't just sell a product. He positioned his company for an industrialized America well before everyone else fully saw it coming, building the core infrastructure that he knew the future would desperately need.
He built an unstoppable empire from raw dirt and iron, and then turned around and gave most of it away. It leaves us with this final provocative thought to ponder. Building wealth is one massive challenge, but deciding what that wealth should ultimately mean for the world is another entirely. What is the true purpose of massive fortune? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating topic with me, and keep questioning the systems that build our world.